Story 1. The Locked Room. When Ava's father remarried, everything changed. The laughter that used to fill their small two-bedroom apartment turned into silence, replaced by the soft, deliberate calm of a house that wasn't theirs. Clarissa had chosen the new home, a sprawling, two-story Victorian on the edge of town, with ivy crawling up the walls and windows that always seemed to fog from the inside. Ava didn't dislike her at first. Clarissa was beautiful in an old-fashioned way. Soft brown hair always pinned neatly, dresses that smelled like rosewater, and a calm voice that wrapped every sentence in sweetness. She called Ava sweetheart and baked cookies on the weekends. But there was something about her that never felt real. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and she always moved too quietly, like someone who'd practiced being gentle for too long. The house itself had secrets, too. Creaking hallways, uneven floors, and an attic door at the end of the upstairs hallway that was always locked. The first time Ava asked about it, Clarissa just smiled. "It's only storage, dear. Dusty things. Nothing for you to worry about." She jingled the brass key that dangled from a ribbon tied around her apron. It gleamed dully in the light, always close to her heart. That night, as Ava brushed her teeth, she heard something strange, a faint melody drifting down from above, soft and rhythmic, like a lullaby sung through a wall. She paused, toothbrush in hand, listening. The sound was too far away to make out words, but she felt it. Something old, something sad. Her father was working late, as usual. Clarissa was in her sewing room downstairs, humming quietly to herself. Ava stood in the hallway, staring up at the ceiling where the faint notes seemed to echo. When she asked Clarissa about it the next morning, her stepmother's face didn't change. She just poured her tea and said, "Old houses make strange noises. Perhaps the wind." But the next night, the wind didn't blow, and still, the music played. Ava's curiosity grew like a shadow. Every night around midnight, she'd wake up to that same lullaby, always faint, always distant. She began to notice other things, too, like how Clarissa sometimes talked softly to herself when she thought no one was around, or how she set the dinner table with 3 plates instead of 2, only to remove one before Ava's father came home. Once, Ava caught her stepmother standing at the bottom of the attic stairs, holding the brass key and whispering something too low to hear. When Clarissa noticed her, she smiled and said she was checking for drafts. Ava tried to tell her father, but he was too busy, too tired, too in love with Clarissa's calm perfection. "She's trying her best," he said one night, setting down his coffee mug. "It's been hard for her too, sweetheart. New family, new start. Be kind." Ava nodded, but inside, something in her gut twisted. Because Clarissa didn't act like someone starting over. She acted like someone trying to continue a story that had already ended. It was a Thursday afternoon when Ava finally decided to find out what was in the attic. Clarissa had gone grocery shopping. Her father was still at work. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the hallway clock. Ava grabbed a bobby pin from her drawer, just like she'd seen in YouTube videos, and crept up the stairs. Her heart pounded. The brass keyhole glinted at her, daring her closer. It took 3 tries before she heard the click. The door creaked open on its own. Dust drifted through the air, catching the sunlight like tiny ghosts. The room smelled like old wood and lavender. At first, it looked harmless, a few boxes stacked in the corner, a rocking chair, a trunk. But as Ava stepped further inside, she saw them. Small shoes lined neatly by the wall, a tiny wooden crib, and shelves filled with stuffed animals whose button eyes seemed to watch her. In the center of the room sat a music box, its lid open, playing the same haunting lullaby she'd heard for weeks. The sound filled the attic, soft, sweet, wrong. Ava's breath caught when she saw the small coffin beside it. It was carved from dark wood, no bigger than a toy chest. A half-finished baby blanket lay folded neatly on top. She knelt, her hands trembling, and brushed away the dust on the lid. There was no name, just a date carved into the wood. The same year her father had met Clarissa. Her heart slammed in her chest. She turned toward the stairs and froze. Clarissa was standing in the doorway. Her face was calm, but her eyes were wide, shining with something wild and broken. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered. Her voice trembled, not with anger, but with fear. "You'll wake her." She stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. The lullaby slowed, its notes warping, stretching, fading into a long, drawn-out hum. Ava stumbled back, her foot catching on a loose board. Who? She managed to stammer. Clarissa's lips quivered into a smile that didn't belong on her face. My little girl, she said. She doesn't like strangers touching her things. Before Ava could move, Clarissa slammed the door shut. When Ava's father came home later that evening, Clarissa was in the kitchen, humming cheerfully as she stirred a pot of soup. Where's Ava? He asked, loosening his tie. Upstairs, doing homework, she said smoothly. Such a good girl. Her husband smiled, kissed her cheek, and sat down to eat. But upstairs, Ava lay shivering under her covers, eyes wide open. She hadn't told him what she'd seen. She couldn't. When she'd finally managed to get out of the attic, Clarissa had been waiting for her in the hallway, calm and composed, pressing a finger to her lips. Not a word, she'd whispered. If you love your father, not a word. Ava hadn't slept since. Every night, she heard footsteps pacing in the attic, small, uneven, almost childlike. Sometimes she heard crying. Sometimes laughter. One night, she woke to find the lullaby playing again, but this time, it wasn't coming from the attic. It was coming from her closet. She froze. The melody grew louder, clearer, closer. Then a whisper. A little girl's voice, faint but unmistakable. Why did you take my room? The door creaked open. Ava screamed, but the sound never left her throat. Her father burst into the room moments later. Clarissa was already there, holding Ava in her arms, whispering softly, "Nightmares, poor thing. I'll take care of her." Her father hesitated, then nodded. He trusted Clarissa. Everyone did. He never noticed that the next morning, only 2 plates sat on the breakfast table. Weeks passed. Clarissa told the neighbors Ava had gone to stay with relatives. She even showed them a postcard, one she'd written herself, signing Ava's name with looping, childlike letters. Her husband stopped asking questions. The attic stayed locked. Sometimes, though, he thought he heard faint music drifting through the house, a lullaby that made his blood run cold. Once, he asked Clarissa about it. "Oh, that?" she said lightly. "Just the wind." She smiled and poured him tea. And behind her, in the reflection of the kettle, for just a second, he thought he saw a little girl standing in the attic window upstairs, staring down with hollow eyes. Months later, when Clarissa passed away unexpectedly in her sleep, the police found the attic key under her pillow. They opened the door expecting boxes and dust. What they found instead was a nursery, immaculate, freshly cleaned, every toy arranged in perfect order. The music box still sat in the center of the room, open and playing its tune. And beside it, a small wooden coffin. Inside lay 2 tiny dresses, folded neatly together. One old, one new. Story 2. The Mirror Lesson. When Mia's father married Lillian, she hoped, desperately, that things would finally go back to normal. After years of bouncing between apartments and quiet dinners alone, her father's new marriage seemed like a chance at stability. Lillian was elegant, soft-spoken, and always smelled faintly of rose oil. She was the kind of woman who made everything look effortless, from setting the dinner table to gliding across a room in heels that never clicked too loudly. Lillian owned a small beauty studio in town. She called it Reflection, and its windows were lined with old-fashioned mirrors that caught the sunlight and sent it scattering across the street. A woman must face herself to find her power, she told Mia during their first week together, while unpacking her dozens of framed mirrors and hand-polished brushes. The mirror never lies, darling. It shows you what you truly are. At first, Mia thought she was just poetic. Her father, Daniel, certainly thought so. He was completely enchanted. Every morning before work, he'd kiss Lillian's cheek and murmur something about how lucky they were. She'd blush faintly, smile that soft smile of hers, and watch him leave with a glint in her eyes that Mia couldn't quite read. The first few weeks were fine. Lillian cooked elaborate breakfasts, told gentle jokes, and even helped Mia with her hair before school. She had an uncanny way of knowing exactly what Mia was thinking, often finishing her sentences before she could. "You're such a sensitive soul," she'd whisper, brushing stray strands from Mia's face. "You feel too much, don't you?" "I used to be like that." Then the mirror lessons began. It started innocently enough. Lillian sitting Mia down at her vanity one evening, holding a gleaming silver hairbrush. "Every beautiful girl needs a ritual," she said. "Something to remind her of who she is becoming." She made Mia sit perfectly still while she brushed her hair, counting each stroke under her breath. 1, 2, 3. The mirror before them caught the soft light of the bedside lamp, and the room filled with the faint rhythm of bristles against hair. When they reached 100 strokes, Lillian smiled faintly in the glass. "See? Don't you look calmer already?" she asked. Mia did feel strange, lightheaded, like she'd been hypnotized. Lillian kissed her on the forehead and whispered, "Beauty is harmony, Mia. But harmony takes practice." After that, the ritual became nightly. No matter how tired Mia was from school, Lillian would appear at her door, holding the silver brush. "It's time," she'd say. Sometimes her tone was gentle, other times firm, like there was no question of saying no. Mia sat in front of the mirror night after night, her reflection gazing back, the strokes growing slower, deeper. Lillian would hum as she brushed, a low, tuneless melody that seemed to come from somewhere older than either of them. "You're beautiful," she'd whisper, "but not yet perfect." By the third week, things started to change. One morning, while brushing her teeth, Mia noticed her reflection blink a half-second too late. It was subtle, almost easy to dismiss, but once she saw it, she couldn't unsee it. Later that day, while passing the hallway mirror, she caught sight of herself smiling faintly, except she wasn't smiling. The reflection's lips curved upward, slow and deliberate, as if mocking her confusion. "Dad," she said one evening, hesitating at his office door, "do you ever feel weird around Lillian's mirrors?" He looked up from his paperwork, chuckled softly, and said, "She just likes her decor, sweetheart. Don't overthink it. She's been wonderful for us, hasn't she?" Mia didn't answer. That night, the brushing felt different. The bristles scraped her scalp harder than usual. Lillian's hands trembled slightly. "You're resisting," she murmured. "Why are you resisting, Mia?" "I'm not," Mia whispered. Lillian's reflection in the mirror smiled wider than her real face did. The glass seemed to ripple slightly, like water disturbed by a breath. Mia blinked hard, but when she opened her eyes again, everything looked normal. Over the next few days, strange things began happening around the house. The mirrors fogged up even when the air was cold and dry. Once, when Mia walked by the hall mirror, she heard whispering, soft, muffled words that sounded almost like her name. When she turned to look, the reflection lingered a moment longer than it should have, as if watching her walk away. One night, unable to sleep, Mia got up for a glass of water. She froze halfway down the hallway. Lillian's bedroom door was open a crack, and through it she saw her stepmother kneeling in front of the vanity, whispering to the mirror. The surface shimmered faintly, and a second figure seemed to shift within it, a woman's silhouette, pale and indistinct. Lillian's voice was calm and tender. "You'll be whole again soon. She's almost ready." Mia backed away, her heart pounding. The next morning, Lillian acted as if nothing had happened. She made pancakes, complimented Mia's hair, even offered her one of her perfumes. "You're growing so fast," she said warmly. "You remind me of her." "Who?" Mia asked. Lillian froze. Then she smiled too quickly. "No one, darling. Just someone I used to know." That night, Mia pretended to fall asleep early. When she heard Lillian's soft footsteps outside her door, she waited until they faded, then followed them quietly down the hall. Lillian was in Mia's room. The moonlight reflected off the compact mirror in her hand as she stood over the bed, Mia's bed. She was brushing the pillow, whispering rhythmically under her breath. "What are you doing?" Mia asked, her voice barely steady. Lillian turned slowly, her expression serene. "Finishing what I started," she said. "You have her eyes, you know. She never should have left me." Mia's blood went cold. "Who are you talking about?" Lillian stepped closer, her reflection still visible in the vanity mirror behind her. Only, the reflection wasn't moving. It stood perfectly still, its eyes locked on Mia. The next morning, her father left early for work. Lillian called Mia down for breakfast in her usual sweet tone. Everything looked normal, the smell of coffee, sunlight on the table, Lillian humming softly. But when Mia sat down, she noticed something strange. The silver brush sat beside her plate. Its bristles were coated with dark, reddish strands, hair too thick and too coarse to be hers. Where did that come from? Mia asked quietly. Lillian smiled. From the other side, she said simply. You'll understand soon. Mia didn't eat breakfast that day. She went straight to her room and packed a bag, but before she could leave, she heard Lillian's voice behind her. Leaving so soon, darling? The lesson isn't over. Mia spun around and gasped. The mirror behind Lillian rippled like water, and from within it, another face emerged. Her own face. But its eyes were hollow, the smile too wide, the skin faintly gray. Lillian turned toward the mirror, her tone reverent. There she is, she whispered. So patient, so beautiful. The reflection lifted its hand against the glass, pressing palm to palm with Mia's own trembling one. The surface was cold, solid, but it pulsed faintly beneath her touch, like a heartbeat. Then, without warning, her reflection moved independently. It tilted its head the wrong way and smiled. Lillian stepped closer, her eyes glinting with tears. Don't fight her, Mia. She just wants her life back. I promised her I'd find someone worthy. Mia stumbled back, shaking her head. You're insane. The mirror began to glow faintly. The air in the room grew colder. From within the reflection, Mia saw movement, shapes forming behind her double, as if countless faces pressed against invisible glass. Do you see them? Lillian whispered. All the girls who came before you. All the ones who refused. They're part of her now. And soon, you'll be perfect too. Mia turned to run, but her reflection didn't follow. It stayed, smiling that same slow, awful smile. Stop, Lillian shouted. She grabbed Mia's wrist with surprising strength and forced her toward the vanity. Look at yourself. Don't you want to be beautiful? Mia screamed and shoved her, the mirror crashing off the table and shattering across the floor. Lillian gasped as if struck, clutching her chest. The reflection on the broken shards twisted, showing dozens of versions of Mia staring back, some crying, some laughing, some whispering things she couldn't hear. In one shard, her reflection mouthed the words "thank you." Lillian collapsed beside the shattered glass, whispering, "She's free now," before going still. Mia didn't wait to see what happened next. She ran from the house barefoot, the sound of that haunting whisper chasing her down the street. Don't forget to look in the mirror. Weeks later, when investigators searched the house, they found hundreds of mirrors stored in the basement, each one covered in fingerprints, each reflecting faint, ghost-like outlines that didn't match anyone living. Mia never went back. But sometimes, in shop windows or puddles after rain, she sees her reflection smile just a little too long, and behind it, the faint outline of Lillian's face. Whispering, counting, 100 strokes. Every night, before sleep, Mia covers every mirror in her room. Because if she looks too long, she knows, eventually, the reflection will blink first. Story 3. The Doll in the Fireplace. Jacob never liked Teresa. From the moment his father brought her home, carrying grocery bags and calling her the woman who finally makes me happy again, something inside him recoiled. She was too cheerful, too polished, too eager to rearrange everything that still smelled faintly of his mother. Within a week, the curtains were replaced, the photo frames were shifted, and the old dining set, his mother's pride, was sold off to make space for something brighter. Teresa always said she was bringing light into the house, but to Jacob, it felt more like she was scrubbing away the past. She moved like someone who belonged everywhere, humming soft old tunes that didn't quite sound familiar. Her hands were never still. She was always baking, cleaning, rearranging, or polishing something that didn't need polishing. Even when she smiled, her fingers twitched slightly, as if winding an invisible thread. Jacob tried to ignore her. He was 16, angry, grieving, and tired of pretending that everything was fine. His father worked long hours and seemed grateful to come home to warm dinners and fresh flowers on the table. Teresa made sure of that. She made everything look good. But there was something beneath that perfect routine. Something Jacob couldn't quite name. It began with the doll. He came home one afternoon, tossing his backpack on the couch, when he saw it sitting on the mantel above the fireplace. A porcelain doll, small and delicate, with golden hair and a faded blue dress trimmed with lace. Its glass eyes gleamed pale blue, and one of them had a tiny crack running through the iris, like a lightning bolt frozen in glass. He stared for a long time before realizing why it felt wrong. His mother had the same eyes. Pale blue, with a faint white line through the left one. The doctors used to call it a birthmark of the iris, but Jacob had always thought it looked like a secret crack, something fragile and unique. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice sharp. Teresa appeared behind him, wiping her hands on her apron. "Oh, that?" she said sweetly. "It's a family heirloom. Thought it might make the house feel cozy." He frowned. "I've never seen it before." Her smile didn't falter. "You wouldn't have. It's been in storage for years." He didn't believe her. But his father came home minutes later, exhausted and smiling, and when he saw Teresa's freshly baked pie on the table, he didn't even glance at the mantel. That night, Jacob couldn't sleep. The fire downstairs had gone out, but a faint flickering glow still danced across the living room walls. He crept down to see if Teresa had left a candle burning. The doll was facing him. He froze. He could have sworn it had been turned toward the window earlier, but now it looked directly at the sofa where he was standing. Its tiny mouth, painted in a faint, faded red, seemed to curl upward ever so slightly. The next morning, he mentioned it at breakfast. "It's weird," he said, stirring his cereal. "That doll. I think it moves." Teresa looked up from her tea, expression perfectly calm. "That's ridiculous, Jacob. Maybe you're overtired. Or maybe," she added with a sharp sweetness, "you just don't like anything that isn't your mother's." His father's jaw tightened. "That's enough," he said quietly. Jacob looked down. He knew better than to argue when his father used that tone. But later that day, when he came home from school, the doll's head was tilted differently again, and there was a faint layer of soot on its porcelain cheeks. That night, he dreamed of his mother standing in their old kitchen, wearing her faded blue dress, humming softly while she stirred a pot of soup. But when she turned, her eyes were glass, cold, cracked, and shining. He woke to the sound of someone humming downstairs. The tune was the same. Quietly, he patted down the steps. The living room flickered with orange light from the fireplace. Teresa was kneeling in front of it, her back to him, whispering softly. The doll sat on the mantel again, and in her hands, Teresa held a photograph. Jacob crept closer. It was a photo of his mother, the one that used to sit on his bedside table before Teresa redecorated. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words froze when he saw what she did next. Teresa held the photo to the flames. The edges curled black as she whispered something low and rhythmic, like a prayer. The doll's tiny face glowed in the firelight, its smile seeming to stretch wider. Jacob stepped back, heart hammering. A floorboard creaked under his foot. Teresa froze. "Jacob," she called softly without turning around. He bolted upstairs, his breath catching in his throat. When he came down the next morning, the doll was gone. "Where's the doll?" he asked carefully. Teresa looked up from her coffee, her smile as bright as ever. "Oh, that old thing. I decided to put it away." "You were right, it was collecting dust." Jacob didn't believe her. That night, he checked every shelf, every closet, every box in the living room. The doll was nowhere. But when he leaned near the fireplace, he thought he heard a faint clicking sound, like porcelain tapping glass. The next few days felt wrong. The house was too quiet. The air smelled faintly of burnt sugar and old perfume, the same perfume his mother used to wear. He caught glimpses of movement in the reflection of the fireplace glass, tiny, darting shapes like pale hands. Then the dreams began again. In them, his mother called his name. Her voice was soft and distant, muffled like someone speaking through thick glass. "Jacob," she'd whisper. "It's cold here. So cold." Her hands would press against something unseen, her breath fogging the invisible barrier between them. When he woke, there were ashes scattered across his bedroom floor, shaped almost like footprints. He tried to tell his father, but Daniel barely listened anymore. Work had consumed him completely, and he seemed more and more distant each day. Teresa handled everything, the meals, the bills, even the repairs around the house. She was the perfect wife, until the night Jacob found her again by the fireplace. He woke to the sound of crackling wood. The house was dark except for the orange glow spilling from downstairs. He crept to the landing and peered around the corner. Teresa was there, kneeling before the hearth, her face glowing in the firelight. In her hands, she held something small and pale, something round and smooth. It took him a moment to realize what it was. A porcelain head. The doll's. Its body lay on the rug beside her, shattered into dozens of delicate pieces. Teresa was whispering, her lips moving quickly. The flames flickered higher, reflecting off the doll's blank eyes. "Soon," she whispered, "she'll be warm again." Jacob's heart pounded. He tried to back away quietly, but the wood beneath his feet groaned. Teresa turned, her face catching the full light of the fire. Her eyes glowed faintly, her pupils shrinking to pinpoints. "Jacob," she said softly. "Couldn't sleep?" He stammered something. He didn't even know what, and ran upstairs, slamming his bedroom door. He could hear her laughing softly below, the sound curling through the air like smoke. That night, the dream came again. His mother stood behind a wall of fire, calling his name, her voice thick with pain. "Help me," she whispered. "She won't let me go." When he woke, his room reeked of smoke. There were ashes on his pillow, and faintly, beneath the smell of burnt wood, was the scent of his mother's perfume. He stumbled downstairs at dawn. The fireplace was cold, but the ashes inside were still gray and soft. As he reached to touch them, something glimmered faintly among the soot, a shard of porcelain. He lifted it carefully. It was part of the doll's cheek, still warm, and on it were faint streaks of red, as if blood had seeped into the cracks. "Good morning," Teresa said behind him. He dropped the shard. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, smiling, her hands clasped neatly in front of her apron. "You're up early." He stared at her. "Where's the doll?" Her smile didn't waver. "I told you," she said sweetly. "It's gone." But in the reflection of the fireplace glass, Jacob saw something behind her, something standing just out of the light. A faint outline, feminine, swaying slightly. For an instant, he thought it was his mother. But then the figure's head tilted at an unnatural angle, and its face shimmered like porcelain catching fire. Teresa turned slightly, following his gaze. When she looked back at him, her smile was wider. "I told you," she said. "It's cozy now." He couldn't breathe. He backed away slowly, his eyes flicking between her and the glass. The reflection showed two figures standing side by side, Teresa and his mother. Both smiling, both perfectly still. As he stumbled into the hall, the fire flickered to life behind him. The reflection of the flames grew brighter until it filled the glass completely, erasing the two women from view. But that night, as he lay awake in bed, the house creaked softly. The smell of smoke and roses filled the air again. And from downstairs, he heard it, the faint, rhythmic tapping of porcelain fingers against glass. When he finally worked up the courage to go down the next morning, the fireplace was cold. On the mantel sat a new porcelain doll, its blue eyes bright and uncracked, its smile perfect. And this time, it had his father's eyes. Story 4, The Stepmother's Feast. When Ethan's father announced he was getting remarried, it didn't come as a surprise. It had only been a year since his mother's death, and though grief still hung over the house like dust that refused to settle, his father had started smiling again. The kind of smile that looked forced at first, then slowly became something real, or at least something practiced. Ethan was 16, old enough to notice when adults pretended not to be lonely. He met Irene at a dinner in early spring. She wore pearl earrings and a neat bun that made her look like she'd stepped out of an old painting. Her voice was soft, each word carefully chosen. She told Ethan she was a teacher once, before she decided she preferred the peace of home life. "Home," she said, "is where you feed the soul." Ethan didn't know what that meant, but his father's eyes lit up when she said it. After the wedding, she moved in. Within days, the house began to smell different, like baked bread, cinnamon, and something else, something deeper. The kitchen became her kingdom. Every morning, she woke before sunrise, her silhouette visible through the crack under Ethan's door. He'd hear her hum an unfamiliar tune, slow and low, as she worked the dough, chopped vegetables, or stirred something on the stove. She insisted they all eat together. "Food makes a family," she'd repeat. Ethan would sometimes catch her watching him as he ate, her eyes glinting with quiet satisfaction. Her meals were rich, chicken so tender it melted in his mouth, soups that comforted even his restless heart. But there were never leftovers. Not a scrap. Once, Ethan tried to save a slice of bread for later. When he came back from school, it was gone. The plate was washed, dried, and put back in its place. He asked her about it, and she smiled. "Food doesn't like to sit," she said. "It should be enjoyed fresh, while it's still alive." He thought she was joking. A week later, he came home early from school. His father's car wasn't in the driveway, but the smell of cooking drifted through the air, thick, sweet, and meaty. He crept quietly toward the kitchen. Irene stood at the counter, her back to him, hands moving quickly. Something red glistened under her knife. It wasn't beef. The color was too dark, almost black in the low light. She didn't notice him, but he could hear her whispering, not in English, not even in words he could recognize. The tone was rhythmic, like a chant. She lifted her hands and pressed her palms together, as if praying, before dipping them into a bowl of liquid. Ethan ran back upstairs before she turned around. That night, she made stew. His father praised it. Ethan pushed the bowl away. "Not hungry?" Irene asked sweetly, brushing her hair back from her face. Her hands were pale, spotless, as though she hadn't spent the day chopping anything at all. "I'm not feeling great," he muttered. Her eyes lingered on him a second too long. "A growing boy needs his strength," she said softly. "You'll get sick if you don't eat." He excused himself and dumped the stew in the trash when she wasn't looking. 2 days later, the neighbor's dog went missing. A golden retriever named Daisy that always barked when Ethan walked home. He noticed the silence first, then saw the posters that went up on the light poles. Irene baked cookies that afternoon. "Poor thing," she sighed when the neighbor came to ask if they'd seen Daisy. "Such a sweet dog. I do hope she turns up." She handed the woman a tin of cookies, still warm from the oven. The woman smiled, thanked her, and left. That night, Ethan dreamt of Daisy. He saw the dog's eyes, glassy and still, reflected in a silver pot. He woke up sweating. The next week, the mailman vanished. The police came by to ask questions. Ethan's father answered while Irene stood beside him, her hand resting gently on his arm. She offered the officers tea, with slices of her homemade bread. They left smiling. Ethan noticed the smell again that night, that same heavy sweetness he'd first caught weeks ago. He followed it downstairs and froze. Irene stood in the kitchen, her hair undone, her apron stained. On the counter was a leather-bound book, its cover slick and darkened with age. She was writing in it with a fountain pen, her letters small and perfect. When she left the kitchen, he slipped in and opened it. The pages were filled with recipes written in shaky handwriting, some in English, others in what looked like Latin. The first one read, "To bind love, serve the heart warm." Another said, "To keep loyalty, feed the blood." And below that, "To silence fear, boil until tender." He slammed it shut. His heart thudded in his ears. He put it back and ran upstairs, too afraid to breathe. He told his father everything the next morning. The book, the missing animals, the whispers. His father stared at him, tired and bewildered. "Ethan, this has to stop," he said. "I know it's hard adjusting, but Irene is trying. You need to meet her halfway. She's cooking people." Ethan snapped. His father slammed his hand on the table. "Enough. She's my wife. Our family." That word, family, stuck in Ethan's head like a splinter. That night, Irene made another stew. The aroma filled the house. His father sat across from him, spoon in hand, smiling as if nothing had happened. Ethan couldn't eat. The steam from the bowl curled like ghostly fingers, and in it he swore he could smell iron. "Go on," she said gently. "You'll like this one. It's special." His father took a bite, nodded approvingly. "Delicious," he said. "What kind of meat is this?" Irene smiled. "Something rare." Ethan pushed his chair back. "I'm not hungry." Her eyes hardened. "Don't waste food." He stood and ran upstairs. Behind him, he heard her say softly, "He'll learn to love it soon enough." That night, he couldn't sleep. Around midnight, he heard footsteps, soft, deliberate. Then the sound of the refrigerator door creaking open. He crept out of bed and looked down the hallway. The kitchen light flickered. Irene stood there again, humming that same low tune, her hands buried in a bowl. He moved closer, heart hammering. She turned, not fully, but enough that he saw her face in the reflection of the window. Her eyes were wide, black as ink, her smile stretched unnaturally thin. She lifted a ladle, dripping with something red. Ethan ran back to his room and locked the door. He barely slept, and when he finally drifted off, He dreamed of knives, of bubbling pots, of voices whispering. Food makes a family. The next morning, his father wasn't at the breakfast table. Irene served only 2 plates. "Where's Dad?" Ethan asked. "Working early," she said. "Eat before it gets cold." He didn't touch it. At school, his father didn't answer any of his calls. By afternoon, Ethan asked the school secretary to call home. No answer. That evening, he returned to a quiet house. The smell of cooking hit him before he even stepped inside. The table was set for one. She stood at the stove, stirring. Her hair was pinned back neatly again, her face calm and clean. On the counter sat the leather book, open to a new page. "I thought we'd have dinner together tonight," she said softly. "Where's my dad?" She smiled. "He's with us." Ethan's stomach twisted. "What did you do?" She ladled the stew into a bowl, the dark liquid sloshing thickly. "You should eat while it's warm." He turned to run, but her hand shot out, cold, surprisingly strong, gripping his wrist. Her eyes gleamed with something that wasn't quite human. "Don't leave the table," she whispered. "Families eat together." He tried to pull free, but she pushed him into the chair and set the bowl before him. The smell was overwhelming now, rich, metallic, sweet. "Just one bite," she said. "Then everything will be fine." He stared down at the meat. It looked like beef, but the texture was wrong, too soft, too familiar. "Where's my father?" he asked again, his voice breaking. She leaned in close, her breath warm on his ear. "He's part of you now," Ethan screamed. The sound didn't last long. When the police came 2 days later, the house was empty. No one answered the door, though the windows were open and the air smelled faintly of stew. The kitchen was spotless, not a dish out of place. On the counter sat a single closed book, its leather cover still damp, as if it had just been handled. Inside, on the final page, was a new recipe written in Irene's delicate script. To keep the home whole, serve together. To bind the last son, stir with love. And beneath it, a single note. Family is forever. Story 5, The Wedding Portrait. When Lily's father announced he was remarrying, it didn't feel real. The words sounded hollow over the clink of silverware that evening, as if spoken by someone else entirely. He looked lighter somehow, hopeful, but also distant, like a man stepping out of a fog and into another one. Her mother had been gone only 2 years. Gone, not dead, because Lily couldn't bring herself to say that word aloud. Cancer had taken her fast, a cruel unraveling of everything she remembered as home. For months after the funeral, the house was filled with silence and unwashed dishes. Then, suddenly, her father had started smiling again, small, careful smiles that looked like apologies. When he introduced Vanessa, Lily knew she didn't like her. Vanessa was beautiful in a way that felt artificial, every hair in place, lipstick perfectly matched to her nails. She spoke softly but left no space for anyone else's voice. Every gesture felt rehearsed, every laugh timed, like she'd studied how to be likable in a mirror. Still, her father adored her. The wedding was small, held in a rented garden full of white roses. Lily stood stiffly beside her father, watching as Vanessa glided down the aisle in a lace dress that shimmered like frost. The ceremony was short, the vows memorized, the smiles bright. And then, just like that, her father was no longer just hers. When they returned home a week later, Vanessa arrived with boxes of decorations. Within hours, she had rearranged the living room, moved the couch, replaced the curtains, changed the scent of the air with lavender candles. "It feels warmer already, doesn't it?" she asked, her eyes flicking toward Lily. Lily didn't answer. The last thing Vanessa unpacked was a large framed photograph. She hung it above the fireplace. "Our first day as a family," she said proudly. The frame gleamed gold, polished like something from a museum. The picture inside showed the 3 of them, her father with his arm around Vanessa, both of them smiling radiantly, and Lily, standing beside them in a pale blue dress, her expression soft, dreamy. But she didn't remember that photo being taken. She hadn't worn that dress to the wedding. She hadn't stood like that, and she certainly hadn't smiled that way. It looked like her, but not her. Her eyes in the photograph seemed unfocused, almost vacant. "Who took this?" she asked. Vanessa's lips curved faintly. "A friend," she said. "I wanted something to commemorate the start of our life together." As she adjusted the frame, The light from the fire caught something faint in the background of the image. A blurred figure, almost hidden by the brightness of the day. A woman in a wedding dress whose face had been painted over in white, like someone trying to erase her. "Who's that?" Lily asked. Vanessa didn't look up from the frame. "No one important," she said. That night, Lily couldn't sleep. The portrait downstairs seemed to hum in her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her own reflection in the glass, only slightly wrong, smiling when she wasn't. The next morning, her father was gone before she woke. Vanessa made breakfast. The smell of butter and eggs filled the kitchen, but the warmth felt off, like a mask over something rotting. "Your father's working late tonight," Vanessa said. "He's been under so much pressure lately. I told him he should rest." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Lily ate silently. The portrait loomed behind her, reflecting the flicker of the kitchen light. Out of the corner of her eye, she thought she saw the painted-over figure shift slightly, like the blur was breathing. Over the next few weeks, small things began to change. Lily started catching her reflection in strange moments. Windows, mirrors, even her phone camera, and it never looked quite right. Her eyes looked more tired, her mouth slightly downturned. The portrait seemed to follow her. Wherever she sat, she felt its weight pressing behind her back, as if the version of her inside the frame was watching. Sometimes, when she passed by, the reflection in the glass didn't match her movement. It would linger for a second longer, lips parted, eyes wide, as if trying to speak through the glass. She told her father once. He laughed softly, squeezing her shoulder. "It's just stress," he said. "You're adjusting. Give it time." Vanessa placed her hand over his. "Change can be difficult for children," she said. "Even for older ones." "I'm 17, Lily muttered. Vanessa smiled. All the more reason to learn how to accept new beginnings. That evening, Lily found the portrait slightly tilted on the wall. She reached up to fix it and froze. Her painted smile inside the photograph had widened. It wasn't big enough to be obvious, but the corners of her mouth curled higher than before, the teeth too visible. She blinked, and it was normal again. She stepped back. Maybe she was imagining it. But the next morning, her eyes in the portrait looked darker, hollowed, and behind them, the blurred white figure seemed clearer. One stormy night, Lily woke to a crash from downstairs. She ran into the hall. The portrait had fallen. The frame lay shattered on the floor, glass glittering in the firelight. Her father rushed in moments later, barefoot, half asleep. Vanessa followed, wearing a robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. "Oh, how terrible," she said softly, kneeling by the pieces. "It must have loosened from the wall." She carefully picked up the photograph, brushing the shards aside. But behind it, hidden beneath the picture, was another image. Older, sepia-toned. A man, a woman, and a young girl stood in front of a grand old house. The woman looked exactly like Vanessa, but younger, wearing a different era's clothes. The resemblance was uncanny. "What's that?" Lily asked. Vanessa's hand trembled just slightly as she placed the photo face down. "A mistake," she said quickly. "An old frame from a shop. They sometimes use filler photos." But Lily knew the frame had been brand new. She'd seen it unboxed herself. Her father didn't press. He looked tired again, confused. He simply hugged Vanessa, told her not to worry, and went back upstairs. Lily stayed up until dawn, staring at the empty spot above the fireplace. By morning, her father was gone. His phone was still on the counter, charger plugged in. His car was missing. Vanessa stood at the window, robe neatly tied, coffee cup in hand. "He had to leave early," she said. "Something urgent came up at work." But when the police came that evening, after Lily filed a missing person report, Vanessa told them a different story. "He's been distant lately," she said, her voice trembling. "He said he needed some time alone. Maybe I wasn't enough for him." She began to cry softly, and the officers nodded sympathetically. Lily tried to interrupt, but one look from Vanessa silenced her. It wasn't a glare, just a calm, unblinking stare that froze her in place. When the police left, Vanessa sat at the dining table and began polishing the empty frame. "We should put it back," she said. "It doesn't feel like home without it." Weeks passed. Lily stopped eating at home. She barely slept. The portrait, now rehung, showed only two figures, Vanessa and her father. The space where Lily had once stood was gone, replaced by an elegant vase of flowers. When she confronted Vanessa, the woman tilted her head slightly, as if amused. "You must be remembering wrong," she said. "You were never in this photo. It was just the two of us that day." "I saw it," Lily said. "I saw me standing there." Vanessa's smile widened. Memory is such a fragile thing. Lily's breaking point came one afternoon when she went through her father's study, desperate for clues. In the bottom drawer of his desk, she found a faded envelope with her mother's handwriting. Inside was a photograph, Vanessa, younger again, standing beside a man Lily didn't recognize. A different husband, a different child. Both smiling the same way her father and she had in their family portrait. The back of the photo read, "Vanessa and Peter, 1994. Lily searched the name online. There were no records. No marriage certificates. No obituaries. Nothing. That night, she confronted Vanessa. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Why are there pictures of you with other families?" Vanessa stood by the fire, her face calm, unreadable. "Families change," she said softly. "But memories stay. I keep them close." She reached into the drawer beneath the fireplace and pulled out a thin black folder. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Each one showed Vanessa with different men, different children. Each family smiling, perfectly posed. Some of the faces were crossed out, others had faint white paint covering their eyes. And at the end of the stack was a new picture, her father and Vanessa, framed and pristine, the date engraved below, 2025. "You'll understand one day," Vanessa whispered. "Families are built, not born. Sometimes they need preserving." Lily ran. She drove through the night to the old address printed on the back of one of the photos, the house from the sepia picture. The place was real, a decaying Victorian on a lonely hill. Inside, the walls were lined with portraits, hundreds of them. Men, women, children, all smiling. The same perfect, rehearsed smile. Near the end of the hall hung the newest one, her father and Vanessa. And between them, faintly visible beneath the surface of the paint, a third face trying to emerge. A girl's face. Her face. The brushstrokes weren't dry yet. When the police eventually came, they found no trace of Lily. The house was empty except for the portraits. Vanessa was gone. A week later, a new family moved into a bright, suburban home 2 towns away. The realtor mentioned the previous owner was a widow who moved abroad. She smiled politely as she welcomed the couple and their teenage son inside. "Let me take a photo," she said, lifting her camera. "Something to remember your first day as a family."